Welcome back to MotionPic Recap. Today we're going to recap a movie titled The Distinguished Gentleman. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Somewhere in Florida, a man called Jeff Johnsson is campaigning to get re-elected, being a very popular and loved leader in the state. And then a man called Zeke gets a note. A black man follows him but is interrupted by people thinking he is a waiter. Meanwhile, Zeke meets a woman in a room, asking if she is really her. And she says he wanted her to come and tie him up like he was wishing. And then the black man appears showing a police badge. And Zeke wonders what's happening. The black man's name is Thomas Jefferson Johnson, and he tells Zeke that he's been tricked by this phone sex company to use his credit card to take his money. And suddenly a man claiming to be the woman's husband appears. And Thomas cuffs them. Thomas then tells Zeke he needs to testify against these two criminals. But Zeke says he can't testify, and Thomas says phone sex is nothing to be ashamed of, remarking that many freaks do it, and Zeke says his wife can't find out and that he is a public figure. Zeke tells Thomas to please get the criminals out of there quietly, and says he will not testify. And Thomas adds then they will come back and blackmail him, saying this couple historically has demanded $20,000. And Zeke says okay and goes to her safe and fetches the money to give them. Thomas says the two have a tape of his phone call to the woman in their car, and Zeke wants it before letting him go. But when going up to the police chief to tell him of their exceptional officer Thomas has vanished with his cash, and the police chief says they have no officer Thomas. While hiding, Thomas hears Jeff explaining he is saying in his campaign to go back to Washington. But actually he is going to leave just before the election, which allows him to get $1.3 million that is left in his campaign fund, remarking it's the grandfather loophole. But then the other man called Olaf tells him if he stays and helps this tech company, he may get stock options for a couple $1,000s that will easily become several $1 million in a year or two. And Jeff changes his mind and says he might be able to go to Washington one more time. That evening, Jeff has an important meeting with a young woman, but suddenly passes out, and apparently never wakes up again. And not long after there is a funeral held in his honor. At the home of his grandmother, Thomas suddenly gets a call from a sex phone customer, wanting to talk to a Swedish lady. And Thomas starts using his girl voice, talking dirty back to him. And when hearing it, his grandmother tries to stop him with his weird business. Soon after, they all hear on the TV that the congressman Jeff Johnsson has died, and his grandmother remarks it's weird how people just vote for famous names they know, remembering a man when she was young who died in the election and people still voted on him so that he won. Thomas gets an idea, since his surname is the same as Congressman Jeff Johnsson, and his middle name is Jefferson like the congressman's first name, and next he explains a plan to his friends to become a congressman, since he has heard you can make millions. The others ask what they will gain from this, and he says a congressman can also hire his own staff, who he can pay up to $500,000 a year, remarking, this is the con of a lifetime and it's all legal. Next they are going to a woman who is part of a small political party, whose candidate never wins because they are so small. But Thomas says he can win for them this time and tells them to stop and just go away. But then Thomas says his name is Jeff Johnsson, where his middle name is Jeff, and she suddenly lights up, remarking, that's a name even people with Alzheimer's will remember. He then goes to talk to the late Jeff Johnson's wife, pretending he is a big fan that wants to create a museum for him, asking if she has spare stuff like posters from Jeff's campaign that he may take, and she just tells him to take it all. Next they are all helping him to continue the campaigning for Jeff Johnsson, like he is still alive, fixing posters and taking calls from media and anybody wanting to see him, saying he just had a surgery and can't take visitors. They drive through all the different communities, talking in speakers and telling people to vote for Jeff Johnsson, and even create campaign videos for TV. Next, people all over are voting for the name they have been voting for years, and later that night Jeff Johnsson has won the election for congressman. And Thomas gives a speech about changing the future, and people cheer. Sometime later he arrives in Washington, and the old congressman, Jeff's administrative assistant, introduces himself as Arthur, who says he will help them find a nice hotel to stay at. Arthur then asks Thomas if it is possible that he can become his administrative assistant, since he has extensive knowledge. And Thomas tells him to send him his resume. Next, Congressman Thomas Jeff Johnsson arrives at the Capitol with his staff. Since he doesn't have his congressional pin on him, and since they don't believe his name is also Jeff Johnsson like the old congressman, he has to identify himself to a woman to get access to his office. Arriving at his office, he sees Arthur sitting in it and asks why his office looks like a shithole. And the man says he missed the lottery, explaining they assign offices by draw, and since he didn't show up, he got the worst one. Arthur then asks if he is hired, and Thomas says okay. Next they are mingling among other congressmen. He meets a couple of gentlemen that remark they liked his con and got in as a congressman on solely name recognition, while they had to kiss ass for months. And Thomas start to get to know some of them. Thomas meets a man called Terry, who says he can help him pick up his first 25 grand this week from lobbyists. After which Terry explains that he should consider becoming a member of committees, which makes all the difference taking Dick Dodge, who is speaking as an example, saying he raises more money than any other congressman, but is also not only part of the most prestigious committee, but is chairman of it. As they are about to go home, Dick comes over and asks if he can join him for a moment to talk, and when sitting down he asks Thomas why he really became a congressman, telling him to skip all the bullshit talk. Next Thomas goes and wakes up Arthur, asking him what the name of the committee Dick is part of, and Arthur remarks it's the Power and Industry Committee, and Thomas asks how to become a member of that committee. Arthur says it takes years to become a member, unless the president or some enormously powerful special interest group would make him a favor. The following day, Thomas and his staff start calling people in the Power and Industry Committee, asking questions about whether they have any black people as members, acting like they are part of NAACP and other prominent black organizations. Loretta finds Dick's new secretary planting fake rumors that the media are going to call the Power and Industry racist for having no blacks as members. A couple days later, Dick summons Thomas to talk. Thomas lies about having been approached by several other committees that suddenly want a black man as a member, but remarks he doesn't understand why, and Dick tells him he shouldn't join the others, saying his committee is much better and would love him to be part of it. Next he has managed to con himself into the Power and Industry Committee, and Dick wants him to smile for the media, to show the world they have a black man on the committee. Afterwards Thomas' office is filled with powerful lobbyists, wanting to give him tens of thousands of dollars to his new foundation, to get his vote on things. Suddenly he sees a cute woman called Celia. He starts flirting with and she rejects him in a slightly sassy way, asking where Congressman Thomas is. He reveals it is him, and she begs for forgiveness, saying she is legislative director of Pro Bono, and wants to schedule a meeting with him. Thomas says they can have a meeting tonight over dinner, and she says she wants a professional meeting, saying she will call his staff, and adds in a cheeky way she wants to hear his opinion on extending sexual harassment law to include congressmen. Next he gives a speech in front of poultry company lobbyists, making no sense in his speech, but they all love him, because they know they need his vote. Later he meets with Celia and her colleague. They want him to help them protect people from too high car insurance, additives to food, and unsafe materials in children's toys, and he is more than glad to hear about it and try to help them. He asks if they can schedule 2 long meetings, 2 Saturday nights to talk through all the ins and outs. Over lunch Thomas speaks to Terry again, who asks his position on sugar price supports, and not knowing what he should say he asks Terry what he thinks. Terry explains it makes no difference to him, since if he is for it he will get money from the sugar producers, and if he is against it he will get money from the candy producers. Thomas asks how anything will get done if they get money from both sides, and Terry remarks that's the beauty of the system, because nothing will get done. Days pass by, and his staff calls around to all kinds of lobbyists, asking what they will pay Thomas if he votes for what they want him to vote for, and they start making tens of thousands a week from it. He is invited to paid luxurious short vacation trips, to hunting games, and to nice golfing courses, and money just rolls in. He then meets Celia to talk about legal stuff she wants him to vote for. Since he has no idea of what she is talking about, Arthur helps him with everything he should reply, and say. Afterwards, Thomas asks why she quit being a big-time lawyer, earning $100,000 a year, and became a pro bono legislator. And she replies she found more meaning. Thomas remarks he came to Washington with a specific goal in mind, but that she has reminded him of his grandma, who taught him to pursue goodness, and now he feels bad the better he does as a congressman. He asks if they can go on a date Saturday night, but Celia wants a date on Sunday morning instead. Next they are at church, and the man preaches about people valuing gold over goodness should be punished. and Thomas feels like he's targeted. The man is Celia's uncle Eli, and he remarks his niece tells him that Thomas is not half as slimy as he thought, which puts him somewhere in between a lizard and a toad. Eli later sees him play cards, and afterwards they talk. Eli says some people actually do something as congressmen, besides saving their own ass, and Thomas remarks he sounds like his own father, who also used to say he was a scumbag. Suddenly, it's time to vote on passing a law and he votes nay. When asked what bill he voted for, Thomas doesn't know, and asks his colleague congressman, who also don't know, and Thomas just makes up that it was a law making sure children get better lunch, and that he voted for it. He adds he will later vote to make sure children don't have to do so much homework, and the children cheer. Later a woman with her daughter is asking to talk to Thomas Johnson. Loretta says Thomas is very busy and doesn't have time, and as they refuse to go until they see him, she says they can't. They try to get them out of there, but then Thomas suddenly appears, asking what's happening. The daughter has had brain cancer, but has luckily made it. Thomas wants to know why they are there, and they say children at her school are all suddenly getting brain cancer, and after having investigated everything from food to water, they realized it was all because of power lines near the school. Thomas brings Celia to check it out, asking Celia if it is true. These are causing brain cancer, and she remarks it is very suspicious. The White House would kill a report saying, "Power lines probably cause cancer." And next they are telling media they will make sure the public learns about this hazard. Dick later says it was a very smart move of him, to make him seem sympathetic, which will help him make a name for himself in politics. But as Thomas says he was serious about stopping power lines to be built near neighborhoods, Dick warns him to continue that thought. Terry arrives with two rich guys from the power industry, and suddenly Thomas sees one of them as Zeke, the man he conned $20,000 from with his phone sex gig, and he immediately walks up trying to remind him indirectly he still got the phone tape of it. They sit down to talk about the power lines, and Thomas says they must be moved, since a study shows children are developing cancer. But the others explain that if they should move or dig down the power lines, it would cost at least $5 billion, which would triple electric bills for all in the district. Thomas says he just wants a hearing, but the others say only talking about it would cause house prices in the district to fall, making people lose equity in their homes and would destroy the real estate market there. Since so many bad things would happen to normal people, Thomas remarks he probably shouldn't do anything. Coming to the scheduled date with Celia, she asks when the hearing will be. And Thomas says the hearing is postponed. In a steam room in the Capitol, Eli enters confronting Dick about his inhumane political positions. Eli remarks he is going to run against him to become the Speaker of the House, saying he will let the world know what he stands for. Dick tells Thomas he wants him to go and speak to Eli to get him off his back, and later he is eating dinner with Eli. Thomas is trying to protect Dick, saying Dick has been under high pressure lately and has made some mistakes. But Eli says every human has to take responsibility for his actions. While on their way home, a distracted taxi driver drives straight into them and knocks all but Thomas unconscious. Thomas calls for an ambulance, and then he calls Dick and explains Eli was knocked out in a car accident, and that he has a chance to make Eli like him more, and Dick has a plan, and tells Thomas to go home. Dick then calls Arthur to leak information to the media, and next Thomas hears about Eli's accident on the news, and that he was driving with a former sex phone worker. He rushes to the hospital, and Celia is angry and devastated, accusing him of setting this up to make Eli look bad for the whole world, telling him to just leave them alone. Thomas goes to talk to the woman Hattie who helped him get elected. He asks her for help, and next Thomas asks his trusted companions to perform a big con, where Dick is the target, adding he has discovered Arthur is leaking information to Dick, saying they need to take him down. Suddenly their friend Homer arrives to help them, and later at the committee, Thomas tells Arthur an EPA guy wants to meet him tonight, and wants him to come along, since it concerns the power lines they bailed. That night they meet the supposed EPA guy who is in fact Homer. Homer acts like he thinks Arthur is a cop wearing wires, but then explains that the White House has forced the EPA to launch a major investigation into the relationship between power lines and cancer, and Arthur immediately calls Dick to explain what he overheard. Thomas calls other people close to Dick, and makes them think a major investigation is coming, and a day later Dick tells Thomas they can make millions if they help Olaf from the power company to get the EPA off his back, saying they just need to confirm it. is true at the head of the EPA. And as Dick leaves to go to call him, Thomas runs to Homer waiting in a car. On his way, Dick is stopped by Hattie, who tries to slow him down. And meanwhile, Thomas hurries to a building, disguising himself as if he is there to sweep for radon, at the office of the head of the EPA. He manages to trick the head of the EPA out of his office, and just moments later Dick calls, asking if the rumors of the investigation are true. And being a master of imitating other people's voices, Thomas tricks Dick into thinking he is the head of the EPA and confirms it's true. Next they have summoned Olaf, from the big power company, explaining the EPA is coming after him, and for a couple $1 million in compensation, they can help him get the EPA off his back, saying no one will find out he sent them so much money. Meanwhile, Thomas' staff is calling media, saying a major scandal might be brought to light this next hearing on clean air. And on the day of the hearing, lots of journalists show up. Celia has come to at the request of Thomas' staff, and as the hearing starts, Thomas starts thanking Dick for his courage at exposing the corruption that eats away at this institution. Dick thanks him for his kind words, saying they need to continue the actual hearing, but Thomas stands up saying he had a meeting yesterday with Dick, Terry and Olaf about the possible EPA investigation on the relationship between power lines and increased cancer risk. Dick tells somebody to turn off Thomas' microphone, and then Thomas picks up a video camera, remarking the American people were represented on this meeting, saying Dick asked him to videotape the entire meeting. Thomas says Dick has courage and is a hero for letting the American people in on what is going on during these meetings. And Dick says they are taking a 15-minute recess. They all meet up behind closed doors, and Olaf starts shouting at Dick, thinking he videotaped them, saying he paid him hundreds of thousands over the years. Olaf calls Dick a bastard for setting him up, but Dick tells him to think, remarking he had nothing to gain from this, that it was Thomas himself that tricked them, being a slime bag, and they ask Thomas what he wants. Thomas says he wants Dick to call the EPA, and launch an actual investigation, if power lines cause cancer. And then he wants Dick to resign from his job. They say they want to see what's on that video, and grabbing it from him he warns he has copies. But when playing it they just see a phone sex video ad. The two remark Thomas is trying to just trick them, telling each other they'd turn this around, and start threatening Thomas back, that if he ain't quiet they will make sure he ends up 20 years in prison. They go back out where the media is hysterical, asking what's on the videotape. They tell Thomas to be quiet, and they go back to their seats. Olaf tells Terry they got this, and Dick tells the media this was just an unfortunate incident they just witnessed. But then Thomas opens his mouth, saying he can't stand this and that the truth is gonna come out. Dick angrily says okay, starting to say Thomas here is a criminal, having committed fraud and con games. Thinking he has won, Dick then dares Thomas to respond. Thomas walks up saying it is true, that he can't deny having been a fraud, but remarks what he has done is nothing. And suddenly Homer plays a tape showing Dick and Olaf. Everybody listens in on Dick and Olaf, incriminating each other, exposing their extreme corruption and showing no regard to the American citizens. And then Dick starts screaming he wants everyone to leave the room. Thomas tells people to give it up for the ex-chairman Dick, and as all the people applaud, Arthur runs up asking what he is doing, remarking they will go to jail, and Dick comes running. The police grab him, and the media starts photographing them. Not long after, Dick is no more, and Celia asks Thomas what he is going to do now that he is no longer a congressman, and Thomas replies his face is very well known now, so he's gonna run for president. The end. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and hit the like button to help us out. Until next time, take care.